In 2019, as the 30th annual commemoration of the June 4th Tiananmen Massacre approached, Hong Kong's streets filled with anticipation and quiet tension. The Hong Kong police blocked off sections of Victoria Park, a place that had long been the city's gathering point for remembrance. When asked by journalists whether someone dressed in black holding a candle could be arrested, Chief Superintendent Liao Jiaji declared that if their intent was, quote, to incite, arrest was justified. With that statement, the symbolic heart of Hong Kong's civil memory was extinguished under the same logic of preemptive repression that led to the massacre in 1989. For over 30 years, Victoria Park in Hong Kong was the site of candlelight vigils, where tens of thousands gathered each June. A luminous ritual of remembrance and resistance, unique among Chinese-speaking communities. But in 2021, the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements of China was forced to disband, its leaders arrested, and its office shuttered under mounting pressure. That same year, we launched the June 4th Memory and Human Rights Museum, not in stone but online, a living mobile monument, independent from the now-banned Alliance. Yet by September, the museum's website was censored in Hong Kong, a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle to preserve memory. When asked what purpose such a digital museum served amid intense surveillance and censorship, I answered, "It is a mobile monument. The truth cannot be fixed to territory, it must travel with conscience, across time and border." Though June 4th has become the most visible act of dissent in modern Chinese history, its significance remains misunderstood. It was not merely a student protest crushed by tanks, it was a moment that could have reshaped global history. The events of 1989 directly informed the totalitarian durability of the Chinese Communist Party and the shape of today's geopolitical tensions. While many observers point to student naivete, disorganization, or even the cunning of Deng Xiaoping as explanations for the movement's failure, a more direct truth emerges from the archives and declassified documents. Deng never intended to compromise with the protesters. As revealed in declassified documents, his regime had resolved on military suppression weeks in advance, long before the world was watching. In this light, the tragedy wasn't a product of miscalculation but rather inevitability, engineered by a totalitarian system that treats dissent as an existential threat. The West, honestly, misunderstood the nature of its interlocutor. They saw uncertainty and chaos but missed the cold calculation at play. Where Western leaders perceived confusion and risk, Deng Xiaoping calculated opportunity. His moves were deliberate, not desperate. His regime was not caught off guard. It was, in fact, executing a doctrine of survival with every step carefully planned. So this brings us to one of the most pivotal and, I'd say, tragic episodes in post-Cold War diplomacy. The secret outreach from President George H.W. Bush to Deng Xiaoping in the massacre's immediate aftermath. After Deng refused Bush's overtures via letter and phone, the United States President actually dispatched National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft and Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger to Beijing, in secret, to preserve bilateral ties, hoping to maintain a fragile relationship despite the world's outrage. Bush justified this covert diplomacy as rational, believing that the long-term interests of the United States required stable relations with China, even after the bloodshed in Tiananmen Square. But such rationality, honestly, came at the cost of moral clarity, and sent a message that economic and strategic interests could outweigh human rights. The visit signaled to Beijing that there would be no punishment for murder, no isolation, no global reckoning, only accommodation and continued engagement. Deng and the Chinese Communist Party understood this very well, using it to their advantage. The so-called reform and opening up process was not a liberal experiment, but a strategic move to legitimize totalitarian rule through economic engagement. When Western politicians mistook this maneuver for democratization, they weren't just wrong, they were naive. As Liu Xiaobo later warned, dictators are not foolish, they are careful calculators of power. What followed June 4, 1989 was not merely repression, but, in fact, a systematic re-engineering of society. The massacre stripped the regime of its last fig leaf of moral legitimacy, leaving a void that demanded a new foundation. In its place, the Chinese Communist Party constructed an ideological wall fortified by surveillance, censorship, and historical erasure, a process I call de-justification education. Through anti-bourgeois liberalization rhetoric, vigilance against peaceful evolution, and patriotic education, the regime taught citizens to accept injustice not only as reality but, remarkably, as virtue. The Ministry of Truth-like media directives, and the firewall dividing Chinese cyberspace from the world, became the infrastructure of this post-Tiananmen totalitarianism. Digitalization and artificial intelligence only refined the process further. The pandemic lockdowns were not just public health measures. They were also social control experiments applying wartime tools of population management under peacetime conditions. Each advance in technology, it seemed, was another step backward in freedom. The blood of not only Chinese people is on the tracks of tanks in Tiananmen Square. This line is no longer metaphorical. The ideological and political logic that drove tanks into Tiananmen now operates far beyond China's borders, shaping global events. The same regime that silenced Chinese students has become a strategic accomplice to the Russian war machine, deepening its involvement. According to a leaked European Union report, China is responsible for nearly 80% of Russia's sanctions circumvention, funneling crucial materials to military enterprises. Ukrainian intelligence confirmed that at least 20 Russian firms are receiving Chinese-supplied equipment, machine tools, gunpowder, and chemicals. Even while Beijing denies involvement, it proclaims unlimited friendship with Moscow, and continues to strengthen strategic cooperation. The world must see through the propaganda. The Chinese communist regime is not neutral, it is a co-conspirator. If Putin's hands are soaked in Ukrainian blood, then the Chinese Communist Party's hands are greasy with complicity. It has exported not just authoritarianism, but totalitarian logic, that violence works, that truth is malleable, and that power exempts regimes from accountability. In June 1963, President John F. Kennedy declared in Berlin, "Ich bin ein Berliner." In 1987, Ronald Reagan stood before the Berlin Wall and declared, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." His words echoed worldwide. Today, a new wall divides humanity, not of concrete but of algorithms, censorship, and digital coercion. It is invisible, yet it shapes lives and destinies. The Chinese Communist Party's information firewall separates not just East from West, but the free from the controlled, the open from the silenced. Hong Kong was both West Berlin and Tiananmen Square, a liminal city whose candlelight flickered until it too was smothered. This generation's call must be, we are all Chinese. If we allow 1/5 of humanity to be silenced under a totalitarian regime, freedom anywhere is at risk. As time stretches away from 1989, a cruel arithmetic sets in. The years pass, and the memory of that night grows heavier. The dissidents who dared to defy tanks grow older, or pass away. Liu Xiaobo died imprisoned, his hope for change unfulfilled. Yu Zhijian, one of the three gentlemen of Tiananmen, died young after years of state-inflicted hardship and isolation. Others, Li Baiguang, Xu Jue, Li Wangyang, joined the roll call of the silenced, their voices now memories. They did not live to see justice, but their pursuit of it defined their lives. Their courage endures in the faces of those who still demand truth and remembrance. Western leaders cheered the fall of the Berlin Wall but abandoned those who helped bring it about. Tiananmen's heroes were not defeated by failure, they were betrayed by indifference. In the New York Times, Sophie Richardson wrote that perhaps the meaning of pursuing justice is not in the result, but in the pursuit itself. A journey, not a destination. Yet for many Chinese living under constant pressure, that sentiment can sound hollow, even frustrating. When democracy feels impossibly distant and dictatorship brings prosperity, justice becomes an abstract concept, almost a luxury. The CCP is quick to exploit this cynicism, reinforcing the idea that order is preferable to chaos. It recasts totalitarianism as stability and democracy as disorder. Even successful entrepreneurs like Jack Ma are persuaded to defend the regime, reframing compliance as duty. But this isn't unique to China. Collaboration with evil for comfort is a universal temptation. The CCP's rise is a mirror for the world. One of the CCP's most effective ideological exports is the lie that democracy causes instability, while totalitarianism ensures peace. This reversal, enforced through propaganda, is actually contrary to modern political science. In War, Guns and Votes, economist Paul Collier found that economic growth in autocracies increases the risk of violence rather than reducing it. In contrast, growth in democracies tends to enhance stability and foster trust in institutions. Why? Because in non-democratic regimes, growth often fuels inequality and centralizes power without checks or balances. Prosperity becomes a zero-sum game, one that elites must protect by force, not by consensus. This is the CCP's model: wealth without rights, growth without law, and surveillance without accountability. The more it prospers, the more it must repress, tightening its grip on society. Stability here is not true peace. It is a cold war against its own citizens, renewed each year with ever-increasing technological precision. Former United States President John F. Kennedy once said, "Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free." The Chinese Communist Party understands this too, but for them, the inverse holds. If even one person is a slave, then no one should be free. That is their logic. "36 years ago, on April 26, 1989, the People's Daily published an editorial that would change the course of history. It framed the growing pro-democracy protests as chaos threatening China's very stability. This editorial became the most consequential act of agenda setting in the party's propaganda history. By labeling the movement as unrest, Deng Xiaoping's regime recast peaceful civic engagement as a threat. The editorial laid the psychological groundwork for justifying mass repression. Tanks soon followed headlines. Even now, CCP apologists continue to defend the massacre, describing it as a tragic but necessary action. They argue that without the bloody suppression of June 4th, China would have spiraled into civil war or widespread chaos. This narrative, stability equals peace, democracy equals chaos, remains the cornerstone of the CCP's ideological defense. It not only justifies Tiananmen after the fact, but also guides every act of political control since then. And yet, this assertion fails when held against empirical evidence, which tells a different story. As philosopher Immanuel Kant argued in his essay Perpetual Peace, democratic societies, by virtue of their accountability and contract-based governance, are far less likely to pursue internal or external conflict, according to his theory. In contrast, totalitarian regimes, where people are subjects, not citizens, are far more prone to arbitrary violence and suppression. The CCP's own record affirms this, from the internal purges of the Cultural Revolution, to ethnic repression in Tibet and Xinjiang, to the crushing of Hong Kong's autonomy and the silencing of dissent. Violence is not what democracy invites, but what totalitarian stability demands. Today, the world begins to wake. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Chinese dissidents including Wang Dan, and declared the United States' concern for Tiananmen's victims, marking a rare high-level acknowledgement of the massacre. Yet such moments are too few, too late. June 4th has not failed, but neither has it succeeded. Civilization still has a chance, but only if the world is willing to recognize the cost of its past silence. It is not enough to remember Tiananmen. The West must reflect and act. For over a century, the Chinese Communist Party has left a trail of devastation. Tens of millions lost in the Great Leap Forward, through the Cultural Revolution, and the tragedy of Tiananmen Square, and now, Xinjiang. The CCP is the world's largest and most enduring totalitarian regime. The West's hope that trade would bring freedom proved costly. The party never wavered. It adapted strategically, deceptively, and methodically. If, back in 1989, the world had punished Deng Xiaoping and the Chinese Communist Party, perhaps today, we wouldn't see a CCP aligned with Putin, threatening Taiwan, or undermining global democracy through economic coercion and digital censorship. The lesson isn't just that the West was mistaken. The lesson is that the West must stand together. The struggle at this point is no longer just between China and the West. It's between totalitarianism and democracy, cynicism and conscience, forgetting and remembering. We must restart the June 4th movement, not as nostalgia, but as mission. And this time, we simply cannot fail again. Because the blood of not only Chinese people is on the tracks of tanks in Tiananmen Square, and well, the next tracks may already be laid.